let's jump right into it. Thanks everybody for attending episode 30 now in Let's Talk Recruiting, where our peers in our industry get together and do some roundtable discussions around various topics. Today's topic is 5 recruiting metrics your hiring managers should know. So kind of going in addition to what recruiters know and kind of track or what have you, kind of getting into what recruiters know and how we what and when do we send out information to hiring managers. It's always sort of interesting to see what interests them. So with that said, we're going to go around our round table and just sort of go over some people's key topic. If you're in the audience, feel free to add any comments or questions into the chat area. And let's see what we got here. Andy, we're going to start off with you. What do you want to cover first?
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I call efficiency. I call it the candidate efficiency ratio. And Sean, thank you very much. My name is Andy Boyd. I work for Sonatype. We are a privately held software product company. And my focus is primarily software engineers. So what I have kind of dabbled with over the years and came up with what I call a little efficiency tracker. And the reason I think it's valuable, not only for me, but the hiring manager, I think the real benefits are twofold. Number one, over time, you'll get a very accurate read of how many candidates do you need in your funnel to produce the number of hires that you need. And then I think the second value that it really gives both parties is the insight. Where are the candidates, in a sense, failing? Meaning where they're being rejected. Is it early in the process, which we all want, the fail fast, or are we rejecting or failing candidates late in the process? And then I think the third, maybe I think outcome of this is the more efficient you can be, meaning the less candidates that you need to present to achieve a hire, the more trust or confidence you're going to gain from both the hiring manager and the hiring team. So therefore, when you present that candidate that might be slightly out of the norm, may not look perfect on paper, that team will be more likely to say, oh, well, we trust you. Let's go and interview that candidate. So that's kind of the preview. Let me just walk through, hopefully briefly, how I do this. One, sorry to disappoint anyone, I do this manually. So created a simple Google sheet. I haven't been able to figure out how to automate it with an ATS yet. The second thing I will also say is this type of tracking tends to work if you are looking at a smaller number of candidates throughout a year. So maybe you're presenting somewhere between, let's say, 80 to 120 candidates during a year. If you happen to be in high volume and you're presenting hundreds and hundreds of candidates filling, hundreds of roles, this would probably not work for you. So with those 2 points, what I first start with is the number of candidates presented, and that's just a number of count that will change. The next thing that I track is candidates presented and rejected, meaning not interviewed. You present them to the candidate, to the hiring manager, he or she said no. That then leaves you a number called candidates that begin the process. So once they've now begun the process, I put one more filter in, candidates that withdrew either before the interview process started or during the interview process. And for me, my withdrawals are almost universal. They withdraw almost before the process starts or the first step. And just as a slight aside, why did they do that? In most cases, it's a timing situation. They're already very deep in discussions with another company and they simply bow out.
Hey, Andy. Andy,
Okay.
quick question on that submit piece right there. Being with your focus on software developers, are you given tech screens?
Yes, and here's where we'll now go into, in our environment, once I present the candidate and the hiring manager agrees, our first step is what we call the technical screen.
Okay.
That's typically an hour discussion. So that's the first step. We want to know how many candidates are rejected in there. If they're successful, we have what we call a take home. It's a technical exercise that we give a candidate. So now we want to see how many are rejected there. The third step is what we refer to as the individual interviews. So we will also now are tracking how many are rejected here. And out of that should fall A, how many candidates receive an offer, how many candidates accept the offer. And then ultimately, you'll have what I refer to as the efficiency ratio, which is candidates presented to offer. So for example, if you're using 100 candidates, you had 22 get to offer. That means in my math, you have a candidate efficiency ratio of 22%. Then I also break that down by candidates interviewed, not withdrawal to offer. That should be a higher percent. And then candidates interviewed, not withdrawal to offer accepted is how I track things. And I realize it may be a little awkward thinking about this without a graphic. And I'd be happy to share it with something with Sean that he could, send out later if he desired. But I guess my pitch to you is begin thinking about for the position or positions you recruit for, start thinking about tracking this. Yes, it's a little labor intensive because it's manual. But if you do this over a year period of time, you're going to understand not only how efficient your process is, and if it's inefficient, you can now start trying to figure out, is it you've got the wrong candidates? Maybe you're not interviewing correctly. Maybe you're not assessing them correctly. And when you become more efficient, you gain even more trust with your hiring managers.
Andy, since you're given that tech screen, it's an on-site interview with the managers, or is it prior to that? And the reason why I bring that up is I'm working at a client where we're really focused on the tech screen. So it goes from recruiter screen to manager phone screen to tech screen. And along with your philosophy of efficiency rates, we're really zoning in on the efficiency of the tech screen. So if they're passing the tech screen, we should have a high, close to 100% where we get to offer. That means the tech screen's on point. That's when somebody in the audience was asking the questions, well, what do you do with these measurements? That's kind of what we do, is we tweak that tech screen to lead to the best candidates. And by best, I mean the ones that get offers. Are you working off an evergreen type model, or are you having working specific recs per position?
Actually, more of an evergreen approach. Now, when I use the terminology hiring manager, you use the hiring manager, I use tech screen. That is, in our engineering world, our hiring managers are conducting what you would call the technical screen. Mm-hmm. So that first conversation is very heavy a technical focus. And much like what you described, Sean, what we're trying to do is, if there's going to be a failure rate, we first want the largest percentage to be at the technical screen. Then we also expect another but smaller percentage to be rejected in the technical take-home, which we kind of think of that as your test or exam. And then the largest, then leaving the most qualified candidates. So you should have a fairly high success or pass rate for those candidates actually going through the individual or on-site interviews.
And Sean Hannah is asking, how do your hiring managers understand this ratio? Is this something that, with being tech managers, I'm assuming they can grasp it relatively quickly. But is this something you're relaying back to the managers, or is this something that you know and you kind of bring in conversation?
It's I do both. I give them access to it. Some are better than others of actually looking at it, but in a lot of cases, it's that conversation of, hey, let's do a quick review of what's worked well. Here's some areas I think we need to think about. And so I also use it as a conversation piece.
Devin, Melissa, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all great metrics. It's one of those things I feel for you from the manual side of things. You may want to look at get an ATS that can help you out. I know ours can produce a lot of those metrics, but you know, sometimes it's not always possible, and it's also dependent on how accurate your ATS is. But no, I think that's good info.
Yeah, definitely. I think someone had also asked which ATSs we were using. So we use Lever now, but at my previous company we used Workday, and that, as not lovely as an ATS system as it was, it did have good funnel metrics, so you could see the conversion rates between each step. So it made it a little less manual. But yeah, that's always kind of been the thing, is whether your hiring managers appreciate also seeing more resumes rather than fewer. So we're looking at efficiency rates, but they may be looking for, you know, I want to see who's out there.
Excellent.
I think it's also sorry to interject. I think it's also a great metric, you know, as a TA leader, to look at your team, right? So, you know, activity or results. You know, I think as recruiters, a lot of times we get hung up on activity versus results, and so you know, you could have one recruiter that's got a ton of activity. Maybe they're sending tons of resumes, but they're never getting to the interview or past the interview stage, right? So I think as a leader, that's something that you know, I could use in addition to showing my hiring team. To gauge, you know, how well my recruiting team is working as well.
Devin, you want to just transition into your topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name's Devin Parrish. I work for CSE Generation. We are a startup company in our 5th year. We're a holding company for retail and e-commerce businesses, and building tech platforms around that as well. So the metric that, or one of the metrics that I found really helpful at the stage of company where we are, as some of you know, working for startups and early stage companies, you know, it can be very chaotic, especially around the recruitment process. You know, processes can change as needs change. And so what I found was that, you know, we were wasting a lot of time either working on recs that weren't you know, fully vetted, or recs that turned out to be, you know, changed halfway through. And so we started looking at a couple of things to really get our process tight and to really find those inefficiencies before we got too far down the road with a rec. So one of the ways that we do that is actually measuring the time between steps and the number of steps that we have for every rec that we have. And we base this, we set our standards. So we may go into a rec, say a data analyst, and this is a great example. To hire a data analyst, when we initially started recruiting on that role, I would say it's more of a mid-level position, you know, not super senior, shouldn't be a terribly difficult recruit. We had 10 different steps from application to offer. And when we started looking at that, and then we looked at, okay, how long does it take the recruiter to get to the resume? How long does it take the recruiter to get from reviewing a resume to setting up a screen? How long does it take for the hiring manager to then review that submittal? And at each step along the way, interview, assessment, interview, assessment, offer. We found that it was taking, for our minimum process, it was taking 5 to 6 weeks to hire a data analyst, which is just insane. And part of that was, you know, we were able to look at that and say, okay, well, we know that this hiring team is really slammed right now because there's a major project going on, or we know that the recruiting team is really slammed right now because we have all these recs, or this particular recruiter is working on multiple things. So we continue to look at that and use that, not only to cut down and see where we can consolidate steps, but if we see a role that's aging or we get a new position, it's something that we continue to look at, and we say we can take that information and either adjust those steps, or we can take that to the hiring team and say, look, we found you a candidate within 4 days, and you're taking 9 days to get back to us to get to review it and set up an interview. And I think when you present that to hiring teams, they often don't think about it. Hiring and recruiting isn't always top of mind for hiring teams, and so it's one of those things to where when they see the raw numbers of, man, if I had gotten back to you at this point, or man, if I had freed up my schedule a little bit at this point, or set some open days on my calendar that you guys could schedule interviews, here's a week that we could have cut out of this process. So for us, it helps rein in that chaos a little bit, and it also helps for us as well, because we can look at it at the front end and say, okay, as a recruiting team, why is it taking us 2 days to get to this candidate before we can even schedule a phone interview? So we found it really helpful. Our ATS, which is iCIMS, we can pull that. Again, I will say it's a situation of you've got to have the right data in your ATS to be able to have that accurate information. We're not the best at doing that. We're getting there. So it is partially manual for me. I usually will pull that report and track that manually to compare. But my hope is that, with our ATS, we can eventually get that into an automated report.
So Devin, to put it simply, you're eliminating bottlenecks then, right? With that type of gather information and bring it back?
Absolutely. And our CEO is very active in our recruitment process. He always wants to know what's going on, where are the bottlenecks. So it's not to point blame, but it is a great way where I can say, hey, we haven't heard from this team or this hiring team in a week. Can you reach out to him, or the next time you see him in a meeting or whatever. So absolutely, it's a great way to take those bottlenecks out.
Yeah, the last two companies I've been at, I'm starting to see the VPs of department asked to get recruiting reports. And it really is, they're really looking at it as, hey, I don't want my manager sitting on good candidates. And that's really what they're looking at, not trying to tell the recruiters how to recruit. So when we give those reportings back, they're not by recruiter, they're by manager. So they're really looking at their team so they can kind of get to chewing somebody's butt if it needs to on their team. So it's really interesting to see it in there, and then to see the reaction of, from the recruiters when they know the business line is seeing all this, that priority is there and that motivation is there, I think. So I love seeing business line managers get into the metrics of it. And that this last place with BI tools starting to come out there with Tableau is out there. You got Microsoft Power BI. I think quite a few more BI tools are coming out there where now they're saying, hey, pull the report from Workday. I know somebody's talking about Workday. This is what project we're working on now. Pulling that data from Workday, still got to massage it a little bit to make the data readable. And then that flows up in the Tableau, because our business units, if the managers are used to seeing data in a BI tool, well, that's probably where they're going to want to see recruiting information. And then the next hurdle is finding a BI admin to help you get it to
right.
So
yeah, I wish I had the luxuries of having all those BI teams and all those analytical type of tools and those sort of things. But no, that is ideal, right? If you can have that flow into one report that someone can pull from a database or a shared drive. Sean asked if I share that with managers during intake conversations and drive SLAs. So we share that in two ways. I have a weekly update that I send out to anyone that has an open position. That report is in there. And yes, we absolutely do remind managers as we sit with them for intakes, if it's a repeat or for a new hiring team, we walk through that as well. So yeah, it's definitely helpful to do that.
And when you say send the report, what are you literally doing? Is it a link to a dashboard, or is it an Excel file, or what is send a report?
Yeah, so it's an Excel file. I've got a dashboard that I create weekly. That is part of it. So we actually will look at active candidates. So I share that information, those time between steps for active candidates. Where I find it most helpful is more historic. I look at offers and hires. So obviously, I'd love to say we're 100% on offers. We're not. So I track both people that get to an offer stage and people that get hired. And then the metric is the time between every step in that process. And even sometimes it's helpful because there may be the last minute interview that gets added in, or there may be the last minute thing here or there that wasn't originally part of our process. So again, it's a great way to say, hey, we added 2 steps here at the end, or we added a step in the middle, and here's what it costs us in time to do that.
Got it. Yeah, kind of, Andy, getting back to your point about efficiency. In the past, I've done what I call Q&Q reports. It stands for quantity and quality. So the quantity, how many hires or how many offers are made, and then the quality, offer accept ratio or submit to hire. Is it like with each report, it's like a different viewpoint as to what information is being looked at and how. So we sort of tailored it up to that audience. Excellent. Andy or Melissa, anything to add to Devin's comments?
Right.
One thing, which was maybe a slight, hopefully not detour, but Devin, you were thinking about bottlenecks. One thing that our organization has done is once a candidate, meaning once a hiring manager has agreed to go through the interview process with a candidate, we have asked the candidate to self-schedule interviews. So candidates have, or hiring managers as well as hiring teams have to provide access to calendars. We use a tool inside of our ATS. We use Lever, but you could also use almost anything like Calendly or You Can Book Me or other things, which we have found has significantly speeded up. So instead of waiting on the hiring manager to reach out to schedule somebody or asking an administrative person to help, we've given that responsibility to candidates, and typically they schedule very quickly.
It's a great idea.
So,
We've started using Lever, like slowly introducing it. I'm mostly now for recruiter phone screens, but some of our hiring managers are open to that. But I'd love to know more about the maybe pick your brains offline later about how it's working for the full panel interviews, because it requires everybody to kind of keep their calendars up to date and stuff too. So.
it does.
Yeah, I think Lever white labels, I can't remember the name of the product, that's like a Calendly. I think it's a competitor to Calendly in some way, but it has that team scheduling, which is like
Yeah.
the holy grail to get in there. Interesting.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thanks, Devin. Melissa, should we jump over to yours?
Sure. And Stephen asked a question also, and I was going to kind of throw that in on top of some of the other metrics I was going to discuss as well, because we've definitely, especially in light of recent events, I know this was postponed, but we've been really talking throughout our organization. We're about a 200-person organization called NGM Bio, and we're a biopharmaceutical company, and we're really looking at a lot of these metrics, both D&I metrics as well as some of these other things. So I think that conversation is still ongoing, and I think it definitely warrants kind of an open session if people have ideas about D&I. I know at my prior company, basically what talent acquisition was tasked to do was provide within each slate of candidates at least 2 diverse candidates per slate. But I know that also sounded like a mandate to some, and so it was kind of back and forth a little bit as well.
Melissa, before you get deep into your item, real quick, when you say diverse, are we talking about gender and ethnicity or both? What defines diverse?
Yes, and it depends on where you are as well, because my last company was a global company, and in Europe, pretty much what you can only track is gender, because that's all people report there. And then here, it was definitely, minority and, or sorry, I always forget the latest word that you use. But basically, yeah, so we were looking at ethnicity and gender as well for the US.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
Sorry, continue, please.
No worries. That was basically, it's still a challenge, and it's still, a lot of education piece. I think letting hiring managers know that it's not, quota, especially a lot of people are very well-meaning right now, and, have ideas about outreach and stuff, and also things that we can put on our website. But I think it's just, conversations are kind of ongoing. But if other people have any insights into D&I hiring, that would be great as well. But I know initially when I had mentioned what I'd like to speak about was kind of as a smaller biopharma company, we are kind of getting back to the basics. And we were talking a little bit about this before the call started, is, time to hire or time to fill, depends on, right, if you measure signing paper versus button seat. And also, I think one of the things, and this might be for a certain extent hiring managers, but it's also something just to kind of speak with leadership about, as well as HR, and but is acceptances versus declines, and decline reasons. And so that's been a huge thing that we've been taking a look at. Are we paying competitively? So we've actually been able to work very closely with our compensation person, and again, this gets a little bit away farther afield from the hiring manager, but it does present an opportunity also, for us to educate our hiring managers about, what the market looks like, how competitive it is right now, and also how we still need to behave with kind of a sense of urgency. And then the other sort of very basic thing that we needed to track but didn't when I first arrived was agency spend. Um, and certainly, I think that gets to cost per hire as well. We don't do a lot of relocations just because the Bay Area is challenging enough to relocate people to without being, a smaller company and not having all the kind of bells and whistles for people. And then I think it's just important, really the other thing that we're looking at from a very sort of, let's get down to brass tacks perspective is the candidate experience. And the managers do have to be a big part of that conversation. TA, of course, you can survey how TA, works with the candidates, and also how the interview process goes and things like that. But the managers also need to be aware that they need to work with their teams to present, first of all, to select a diverse interview team and panel. Also to make sure that they're sort of putting their best foot and best teammate forward on the interview panel, and not somebody who's cranky. And sort of everything else that we can do to keep the process moving forward, and making sure the candidate has a great experience.
Yeah. Yeah, Melissa, to your point on that, what I've done before with getting data is around candidate satisfaction surveys, where we've segmented. We create like 5 different surveys, 5 questions each, and we segment what questions get asked along. It's determined by how far you got in the hiring process. So if you only applied and you got rejected, you get a survey that asks about how easy was it to apply, was information about our company available, versus if you came in for an on-site interview, your 5 questions are about, did you meet the team? Were you greeted? And all really about that level that you got. So in the end, we package it all up, get a good 360 view of our surveys. But that piece, to your point about that candidate experience, once it gets to the hiring manager, that's information that could be shared, right, with the reviews over time. This is how the candidates are experiencing it. If those surveys are by rec, you keep the person anonymous, but we know the rec that it gets attached to. Therefore, you know the manager, right? So you can go in there and have those conversations around candidate experience. And this is what people are saying when they meet you and your team. I've only done that, I think, at 2 places, but it's interesting. There's never been any real fire alarms, so it's not like you're solving anything, but it checks for it. So we basically were giving good news around that regard.
One of the things that we've been looking into is also Lever enables you to kind of, but I think there's only one. I think you have to kind of select your survey. I have to remember and look into that, but you can send candidate experience surveys out through Lever. But that's also been something, to your point, Sean, that, when do you send it? At what stage in the process do you pull the trigger? And kind of how do you survey the different parts of the process as well?
I always do. I'm with Devin on the weekly information going out. So we do the weekly, here's everything that's going on Open Recs, and then quarterly reports are kind of a look back and summary of. But the most important ones are those weekly. Here's the state of the state every week, ongoing, consistently. I love doing Monday morning reports. Hey, there's a lot of questions about diversity in the chat pool. I'm gonna bring up really quick. Let me see if I can share this. It's sort of, I'm going to show you data, but it's kind of manipulative data. It's a demo report of the scorecards that I do. You'll get the look and feel of it. But then let me share this piece of it. it's really around diversity. Does everybody see my screen? It's got like an Excel sheet in there.
Mhm,
Yes.
Right. So this is like when I talk about why I was asking Devin, hey, what is literally the report that you send? And you said Excel. Me too, because it's very customizable. You can save it, you can stamp it and save it in folders so you can see over time. And it's ATS agnostic. So Andy, to your point about, oh, I get my, I have to manually create my reports. All I do is I create reports from ATS, drop into Excel. You'll see here the data tab. And then these are all formulas, and then it just refreshes every time I put in new data. So I don't have to keep manually doing everything. But here's what we've done in a couple of places where we're really looking at diversity recruiting and why I was asking about gender and ethnicity. So here, this top is gender, racial. We're doing year over year, 1920. What we do is we track the key funnel stages going through. How many people applied who are diverse, how many got screened, how many got interviewed, how many got offers. We really use these to look to see if we do have any biases in our interviewing.
mhm.
So you'll see like the differences here, like here's by business unit, right? We do these by recruiter, we do these by managers or what have you. But you'll start to see, okay, 40% of our applicants for the operation roles are diverse. We're screening 46. Okay, we're on point here. We're interviewing 55. So our percentage of diversity is going up. And then we're maintaining that consistency into offers. So we start to look at this and see, do we have an issue? And of course, where you really get into the fun stuff is when you look at management level. So generally speaking, manager and below, people are usually pretty good. There's no issues. You get into executive level, directors and above at companies, that's where you see some tilting of the percentages, so to speak, and where real effort needs to be applied. From my experience, typically at that executive level, that's where you start to see, whoa, okay, this isn't matching up. So I'm not naming any names, but that's typically what I've
Mhm.
seen that gets addressed. And having this data, this number, the recs and the managers, then you start to see, okay, this is where we have, we'll call it hotspots that just need to be addressed. But this is the type of data I like doing scorecards like this. Devin, to your point, the numbers. I'm not a big fan of bar charts and pie charts.
Mhm.
I like to see numbers. It really gets conversations going. So I do these style, I call them scorecards for recruiting. And let me show you another one if I can. Here's another one. Did you see my screen flip? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
everybody sees it. So
Yep.
here's just a summary tab by the rec owner. Could be manager, could be recruiter. Here's kind of like a weekly review of just that 10,000 foot view. How many recs, how many openings, how many applicants you got. I'm a big believer in getting rid of the resume black hole, so I track
Yeah.
the waiting review. So that's what that addresses. And then we get into, hey, what have you done for me lately? How many people moved to screening last week? How many did you move to interviewing last week? And so forth. Then we get into the sort of the weekly or annual scorecard. This is where recruiters get a little fun. They like to track, well, who's got the most hires for the year. This is sort of a running clock on that. So this is the kind of data that I like to provide to recruiting teams. You start sending this out to managers. One manager will hear about it. Hey, can you put me on that mailing list? Because they're starting to see numbers, again, to Devin's point and Andy's, weekly, consistently. Every Monday morning, these go out. I just think it provides a really good rhythm for recruiting teams. But that's it. But the diversity piece, I always find these really interesting to see where things stand. And if it answers that first question you need to ask is, do we have a problem? If not, great. If so, how do we address it? That's that piece. All right. Unless you're going to say something? You look like you're going to say something.
Oh, I was just, no, there's
Okay.
a lot of questions coming in.
Oh, okay. All right. Hey, Devin, if you got to jump, I know you had a hard stop, but I appreciate your time.
You bet. I'm going to bounce. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Devin.
So yeah, there are a lot of questions out there. All right. We could be here a while. What I'll do is I'll summarize. I know we're past that 30-minute mark. What I'll do for the panelists here, I'll summarize or get these questions from the chat. What I'll do is I'll post this discussion up on Zoom and add in, or I'm sorry, not Zoom, LinkedIn, the video. And I'll ping you guys when I post it. I'll try and get up there this afternoon or tomorrow morning. But I'll also post in the comment area some of these questions that are coming through. Maybe we can sort of answer them if you have time, when you have time online. Same thing goes for attendees. I'll post it up there so everybody can see it. Yeah, there's a lot of chat going on. I can't keep up with it, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. It's you know, it's worth its own call probably too. So
Yeah. Real quick. Somebody says, "How do you know the race, gender?" That data strictly is those who self-identify. It is
EEOC.
only that. Yeah.
So
And
at my
it's-
last company where we were big enough to track that, we would have to do it in hindsight. That's the only way we could track recruiter diversity metrics.
Gotcha. And I was surprised at the amount of people that self-identified. I thought it was going to
Yeah.
be a low number, but it's actually a pretty high number.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
But yeah, strictly on that. That's why you didn't see hires in that scorecard, because that I would pull from the HRIS in there. You absolutely, you know what you got. All right. Any final comments, Andy or Melissa, that you want to add? I know metrics and reporting can go a long way, long time. Go
And
ahead, Melissa.
I'll echo the request that everybody's been making that you share those templates if you can, the blank templates,
Okay.
your Excel. But thank you so much for hosting these, Sean. They've been great, and I try to get them on the recordings when I can't listen live.
Yeah, fantastic. Hope everybody learns a little something each time.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me. And I also echo, this is just another great conversation.
Yeah, they can
Definitely.
keep going.
Yeah.
I try to
Yeah.
know people's got time. All right. Well, hey, Andy, Melissa, Devin, wherever you are now, thanks again for participating. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. Talk to you
You
soon.
as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.